I'm not entirely sure there needed to be much regrouping and rebuilding. I mean, these are very heavily militarized places permanently, so not much need to recruit more soldiers. We don't know the state of the ground offensive. You just heard Colonel Lerner there saying it was going to continue as previously. We know that the aerial assault has resumed rather. We've been speaking to people inside Gaza. They're obviously packing their bags, trying to get out of wherever they were if they think that they are at risk. Including there was an airstrike in a place called Abasan, where one of the people we're speaking to lives, and she had to get out and take her family elsewhere. That whole process that we saw for 6 weeks before has resumed. The Palestinian Health Ministry says that at least 50 people have been killed already. I mean, obviously, a pause allows people to regroup. I think the main issue was probably intelligence rather than troop movements. Israel have obviously an overwhelming superiority of numbers and of armor that was already in place. They certainly allowed people to go home for leave. So there were quite a lot of those soldiers on the front lines, got a couple of days off with their families, went back after a couple of days. We knew that the ceasefire was coming to an end at some point over this weekend. And in terms of Hamas, we think, obviously, their plans are not open to us, but we think that most of their fighters have already been withdrawn to the south of the Gaza Strip, leaving behind a sort of skeleton force to fight the Israelis off as long as possible in the north. And also their leadership was already in the south. So again, I'm not entirely sure there needed to be much regrouping and rebuilding. I mean, these are very heavily militarized places permanently. So not much need to recruit more soldiers.
Now, obviously, there are still talks ongoing between the two sides. Qatar is integral to that. They've confirmed that there is discussion. But there's also a question about what happens as part of this prisoner and hostage transfer. Obviously, we saw all the hostages that were being released over the last few days. What happens now to the ones that are still there?
Well, they stay where they are, sadly, for the families of those still inside. I spoke to the father of one hostage earlier today who said he was very balanced and trying to be calm, and said he was obviously delighted about the women and children who've been released, some of whom he knew. He's from the kibbutz that was most heavily affected by hostage taking, where the greatest single number of hostages were from kibbutz Nir Oz. So he said that many of the hostages were people who were known to him, who had seen grow up, along with his own son, who's hostage. He tried to be positive about that, but of course he said he was in a state of desperation about his own personal circumstance. His son, no sign of that he will now be released.
And in terms of that sort of discussion that I talked about before, that Qatar is trying to broker, I mean, have we got any kind of white smoke emanating from there at all? Whether there's any wish actually to have another cessation of fighting anytime soon?
Well, there's the wish certainly on Hamas side, and of course on many people around the world want to see a ceasefire, called on Israel to stop its offensive in Gaza. There's obviously a wish on the Israeli side to see more hostages released, and the negotiations continue. I think to stretch your metaphor, perhaps, I think what you've seen all along from Qatar is smoke with varying shades of grey. There was never really any chance, I think, from the Israeli perspective, that there would be a permanent ceasefire at this stage, that Israel would stop its offensive. There was obviously good news in that a deal was basically achieved for the women and children hostages. In some ways, that was coming to a natural end anyway. We believe there are only 10 to 20 women hostages who are civilian. There are some women soldiers as well, but the civilians is what we're talking about. There are 10 to 20 of those hostages, women hostages left. All the children have been released except for these two terrible story about these two Bibat's children, as we call them, Kfir, who was a 10-month-old, and his 4-year-old brother, who Hamas say were killed in an Israeli airstrike. Israel is waiting for confirmation of that, but they are still officially listed as hostages. They are the only 2 children listed as hostages now. What happened overnight was Hamas gave a list of 7 names of women, and 3 said they would release 3 bodies. We're not sure whose those bodies were. Israel said, no, we think you've got more women than that. We want 10 women, or the ceasefire stops, and that's what happened. Whether that's, there can be another pause if Hamas find another few women to make up a full roster of 10. I mean, it's kind of gruesome, but of course it's also a matter of life or death for some people. So that's where we are on that.